The glass-walled lobby of Blackstone Atelier buzzed with the sound of stilettos tapping polished marble and the low murmur of executives orbiting like satellites around a single star, Dominic Black. He stood in front of the media wall, every line of his bespoke navy suit razor-sharp, like his jawline, like his precision. Cameras clicked. Journalists watched. His PR director gave the nod. It was time. "Sir," a trembling intern whispered, "the audience is ready." Dominic didn't flinch. He thrived in this curated chaos, the spectacle of power draped in silk and tailored in Italy. He tugged at his cufflink, obsidian and platinum, of course, and stepped forward into the storm of flashbulbs. Beside him, Lila Gomez adjusted the earpiece barely visible beneath her chocolate waves. She double-checked the press kits, reviewed the talking points, and rehearsed the surprise brand unity gesture that would showcase Dominic's commitment to inclusivity in fashion. It was simple, harmless, a staged moment of charm, a light joke. Dominic was supposed to take a knee, not to her, to the idea of legacy, to make the headlines softer, a billionaire CEO with a sense of humor. But the universe had other plans and one disastrously viral misunderstanding. He turned to Lila, the words forming like architecture in his mind, firm and functional. "This is for the brand," he murmured under his breath. "Just follow my lead." Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. The photographers surged forward. Dominic pulled a small black box from his coat pocket, custom crafted for a promotional ring from the new bridal line. Lila froze. She was supposed to hold his hand, laugh, maybe fake blush. Instead, he looked up at her with those wolf-gray eyes and said the one line he wasn't supposed to say aloud. "Lila Gomez, will you marry me?" Silence exploded around them. Then chaos. Because Lila, her heart stammering like a jazz drum in her chest, laughed too nervously. She reached for his hand to play along, but too late. The camera shutters had already captured it. A perfect tableau. The cold CEO turned romantic, proposing to his assistant. The video hit Twitter in under a minute. By the time Dominic stood up, the hashtag Blackstone proposal was trending in 5 countries. 22 minutes later, in the privacy of the Blackstone boardroom lined with steel, silence, and shocked executives, Lila tried to breathe. "You what?" she asked, staring at Dominic like he'd just declared war on France. "It wasn't meant to come out that way," Dominic said, jaw tight. "It was a PR metaphor. You got down on one knee and said my full name. People propose in jest all the time, not with a damn ring." The ring in question, now resting between them on the black glass table, sparkled with ominous finality. The PR director, Rachel, looked like she was suppressing a stroke. "We're getting thousands of engagement messages," Rachel said, rubbing her temples. "The public loves it. We can't backpedal. If we say it was staged, it'll tank our authenticity ratings and give Harper Vale an entire news cycle." Dominic's jaw twitched at the name. Harper Vale, the woman who wore couture like armor and wielded gossip like a blade, was already a parasite on his success. A single misstep, and she'd feast on the carcass of his reputation. Lila stood, her pulse thudding at her temples. "I didn't sign up for this." "Miss Gomez," Dominic said, tone softening as his eyes met hers. "I know, and I'm sorry, but we need to think strategically." "Strategically? You proposed to your assistant on camera. That's not strategy. That's a Lifetime movie. I'll compensate you," he said. "Triple your salary. 6 weeks. Just until the press dies down." Lila hesitated. Her spine straightened, but her gaze faltered not out of fear, but out of principle. He noticed. "And," he added, his voice dipping just above a whisper, "I'll give you full funding to launch your label. The one you've kept sketched in your notebook since you started here." Her lips parted in shock. He knew about that? His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Consider it. A professional engagement." The offer hung in the air like perfume, seductive, impossible. A fake relationship. A publicly. And the chance to build the life she dreamed of. She reached for the ring and picked it up, studying the cold fire of its stone. "Fine," she said. But we do this my way. You don't own me. Not in public. Not in private. You want a performance? Her eyes narrowed. I'll give you Oscar-worthy. Dominic almost smiled. Almost. Dominic stood before the press once more, this time with Lila on his arm and a smile carefully sharpened like a blade behind glass. The rooftop terrace of the Blackstone Atelier was washed in golden hour light, every surface curated to perfection. Champagne flutes aligned like soldiers, soft jazz curling in the background, and floral arrangements bursting with engineered spontaneity. Lila wore a deep emerald dress he'd only seen once before, an off-the-rack piece she'd bought last winter but tailored to fit like couture. It was understated, unexpected, powerful. The cameras adored her. And he noticed, Dominic didn't usually notice things beyond form and function, fabric drape, brand potential, posture. But tonight, he noticed the way her hand fit into his, like a question halfway asked. The way she kept her chin tilted slightly upward, not out of vanity, but defiance. A queen forced to play the pawn. He leaned closer, his lips just grazing her ear. You don't have to smile so hard. This isn't The Bachelor. She angled her head, her whisper ice-slick and sweet. You wanted an Oscar-worthy performance, Mr. Black. You should have specified genre. Across the crowd, Rachel gestured sharply from the sidelines. Dominic cleared his throat and raised a glass. Thank you all for being here on such short notice, he began. As many of you saw this morning, I asked a very important question. A wave of camera flashes followed. And Lila said yes. The crowd exhaled. Some clapped. Someone cheered. Dominic's gaze swept the terrace, scanning for Harper Vale. She wouldn't miss this circus, not when it handed her kindling to burn his empire. He spotted her near the edge, wearing blood red and watching like a spider from the center of her web. Lila felt his arm tense. She's here, isn't she? Of course. Let's give her something to really hate. Dominic turned to ask what she meant. But before he could speak, Lila leaned in and kissed his cheek. Not a peck, not an innocent brush. A slow, calculated slide of her lips to the edge of his jaw, soft enough to seem spontaneous, bold enough to set off 1,000 flashes. Dominic blinked. Heat bloomed behind his ribs, annoying, uninvited. He was not the man who blushed. He did not react. And yet, when she pulled away, her eyes flickered up at him, amused, challenging. Checkmate. They returned to the penthouse in silence. Dominic poured bourbon over a single square of ice, watching it melt like the hours of his day. The skyline flickered beyond the windows, New York glittering with ambition and secrets. Lila stood barefoot in the kitchen, undoing the buttons of her coat, her silhouette caught between elegance and fatigue. This is temporary, she said, voice quiet. But if I'm going to sell this fairy tale, I need ground rules. Dominic took a slow sip. Go on. No touching unless in public. He raised an eyebrow. Do I seem like the type to randomly touch people? You do seem like the type to confuse boundaries with strategy. He smirked. Touché. I want creative space, she continued. One room in this penthouse to work on my designs. Total privacy. No critique. No mentoring. No interference. Done. And when this ends, you sign over the investment. No strings. Dominic tilted his head, watching her closely. You think I'd use that against you? I think you don't know how not to control everything around you. There was no venom in her voice, just truth, threaded with steel. And for reasons he couldn't articulate, he respected it. More than that, he admired it. Fine, he said, nodding. But one condition. She folded her arms. Let's hear it. He stepped closer, pausing just short of her personal space. You don't lie to me. Ever. This arrangement may be a performance, but I don't tolerate betrayal. Not in business. Not in life. Her breath caught, just slightly. The heat between them changed, not soft, not tender, but electric. Contained. Agreed, she said at last. Later that night, after she'd retired to the guest suite and the city outside had quieted to a murmur, Dominic stood alone in the penthouse's studio. It had once been his father's. Sketches littered the wall, abandoned concepts for collections that never made the runway. Charcoal lines, fluid shapes, dreams turned dust. He looked down at his phone. The notifications wouldn't stop. A dozen brands wanted to license the story, offers for interviews, exclusive spreads, engagement-themed partnerships. And Harper's Post, a photo of the two of them from a charity gala a year ago, captioned, "Some love stories are real, others are campaigns. Congratulations, Dominic. You always did love fiction." He closed the app, then turned to the small notebook lying on the edge of the table. Lila's. She must have dropped it during the chaos. He flipped it open, then stopped. Sketches. Dozens of them. Raw, bold, unfinished. A new kind of vision, feminine, architectural, fierce. The kind that didn't just follow trends. It challenged them. Dominic felt something shift in his chest. Not desire. Not yet. But respect. And maybe, just maybe, the faintest whisper of danger. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure who was controlling whom. Chapter 2. The Engagement Tour. The engagement tour began with a lie so well dressed it almost looked like truth. Lila stepped out of the black car into the crisp Manhattan air, her hand wrapped around Dominic's arm as cameras clicked like metronomes, tracking their every breath. Her heels kissed the pavement, confident, deliberate. She wore a silk blouse, the color of cream poured into espresso, high-waisted trousers, and a vintage brooch, shaped like a thorned rose, her nod to sharp beauty. Dominic, of course, was immaculate. Three-piece charcoal suit, black tie, pocket square, folded with military precision. He wore his public face like armor stoic, unreadable, and yet, when their fingers touched, his hand adjusted just slightly to hold hers more naturally, as if he were beginning to forget it was fake. The crowd outside the Harper's Foundation Gala was thicker than usual, pulsing with speculation. Phones hovered like vultures. Reporters pushed forward. "Mr. Black, Lila, how did you two meet? Is the wedding this year? Lila, is it true you started as an intern?" Dominic leaned close and whispered, "Smile like I just whispered something dirty." Lila's mouth curved, genuine, this time, and she tilted her head to whisper back, "That'd require you having a sense of humor." They glided up the museum steps, a practiced waltz of proximity and performance, but Lila felt the friction already between who she was and who she was supposed to be. Every step beside Dominic came with assumptions, projections. She wasn't seen. She was studied. Inside, the room unfurled in gold and glass. High ceilings, oil paintings, crystal chandeliers heavy with curated wealth. Socialites and media darlings turned to see them enter, pausing mid-sip of vintage champagne. "Act 1, Dominic murmured, escorting her through the crowd. "Meet the board members." "I've read the briefings," she said, eyes scanning the room. He gave a small nod. "Then you know who not to offend. I also know which ones cheated on their taxes and which ones would trade their firstborn for front-row seats at Paris Fashion Week." He looked down at her, lips twitching. "You're more dangerous than you look." "You're welcome." They approached the trio of investors near the marble staircase, 2 men and a woman, all dressed like they hadn't touched public transportation since the Bush administration. "Ah, Dominic," drawled Charles Blakely, all veneers and vodka breath. "And the blushing bride-to-be. Lila, isn't it? Lovely to meet you at last." Lila extended her hand. "Pleasure, Mr. Blakely. I've heard so many fascinating things." His laugh was too loud. "Charming. You've got taste, Dominic." "About time." Dominic offered his tight corporate smile, but Lila could feel the edge beneath it. He hated being congratulated on something he didn't control. They made their rounds. Wine, conversation, photographs. Lila played the part well. She complimented just enough, asked the right questions, laughed on cue. But under her mask, she studied everything: body language, power dynamics, who bowed and who bared teeth. It wasn't the high society that intimidated her, it was the performance of being unbothered by it. She felt Dominic's hand drift to her back as they approached Harper Vale. Harper stood near the staircase, sipping something dark and expensive. Her gown was asymmetrical, sharp as a scalpel. Red again. Always red. Dominic, she purred. You brought your accessory. Harper, he said with a cordial nod. Still favoring drama over substance? I find they're often the same thing. Her eyes flicked to Lila. Miss Gomez. How quaint. I must say, you photograph well. Very. Digestible. Lila smiled sweetly. And you look amazing. I didn't know narcissism came in satin. Harper blinked. Dominic nearly choked on his champagne. Well, Harper said, mouth tight, it's refreshing to see you haven't lost your tongue. Not yet. I try to keep it sharp, Lila replied. Unlike your last collection. The silence sizzled. Harper's smile thinned. It was lovely to meet you again, Dominic. I imagine we'll talk soon. Privately. Dominic didn't flinch. But Lila felt it, his body shifting slightly toward her, like a choice being made. When Harper was out of earshot, he whispered, You're playing with fire. She's not fire, Lila replied. She's a cigarette lighter with delusions of grandeur. Dominic stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. Not a full one. Just the quiet, incredulous kind that slipped from someone who wasn't used to being amused. I underestimated you. You still are, she said. Back at the penthouse, Lila peeled off her heels with a hiss of relief. She padded barefoot toward the bar, pouring herself a half glass of wine. Dominic remained near the window, city lights reflected in his profile. You handled tonight. Well? I do more than fetch coffee, she said, leaning on the marble counter. I noticed. Silence stretched between them, not awkward but dense. Heavy with things unsaid. Lila looked at him then, really looked. The tailored suits, the immaculate hair, the constant, coiled tension. He lived in a world of edges, but tonight, something had shifted. The facade had thinned. She wondered what it would take to break it. Do you ever get tired? She asked. He blinked. Of what? Being a brand. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned slowly and met her gaze with something raw flickering behind the steel. Only when it starts to feel real. The next morning arrived with a scream. Lila's phone lit up with a dozen frantic texts before sunrise. By the time she reached the kitchen in Dominic's penthouse barefoot, wearing a borrowed t-shirt and yesterday's mascara, he was already pacing with his jaw locked and the television blaring headlines across the silent room. Dominic Black's fiancé, gold digger or future fashion star. Exclusive. Lila Gomez's secret ambitions, her hidden design, passed. Harper Vale. Comments on manufactured romance. Lila stared at the screen. Her spine went cold. Her old design portfolio drafts she had sent anonymously to a startup incubator was now plastered in pixelated glory across a gossip blog. Attached was a whisper campaign. That she'd been aiming to build her own label by using Dominic all along. What the hell is this? She whispered. Dominic turned toward her. His eyes were unreadable, glacier gray. Is it true? What part? That you submitted designs to Avanti last year. The same week you applied to work here. She swallowed hard. I was trying to build something. On my own. You know how hard it is to get a break in this industry if you're not born into it. He stepped closer. And this fake engagement, was that just another ladder? Her breath caught. Wounded. You asked me to do this. I asked for a performance. Not a Trojan horse. She stared at him, the betrayal cracking something open inside her chest. You think I'd risk my integrity to manipulate you into funding me? Harper clearly thinks so. Oh, well then. If Harper Vale said it must be gospel truth. Dominic's fists curled at his sides. I don't care what Harper says. I care that you didn't tell me. Because it didn't matter. Because I shelved that dream the moment I became your assistant. You know why? Because I needed stability. I needed to prove myself. And I have. Every single day. Her voice shook, but she didn't step back. Don't confuse ambition with betrayal. He didn't respond. And that was worse than yelling. That silence, brittle and cold and absolute, was the Dominic Black she feared. The one who cut people out like cancer. Lila turned, grabbed her phone, and left the room. The press circus only escalated. Later that afternoon, Lila stepped out of a town car alone to attend a charity luncheon. She and Dominic were supposed to attend together. But he had gone silent. New texts, new calls, new partner. Alone, she faced a wall of questions, each more invasive than the last. Lila, did you apply to compete with Dominic's label? Are you using him to fund your own brand? Is this really just another PR stunt? She smiled, posed, said nothing. Inside the venue, she was met with whispers behind fluted glasses and half-turned shoulders. Socialites who had adored her last week now looked at her like she was the villain in a cancelled Netflix series. She walked through the ballroom with her head high, her smile stitched tight. She wore a cobalt silk midi dress of her own design, something she'd sewn herself in college, years ago, when dreams still felt like oxygen. Now, they felt like poison. She found her seat at the long banquet table. Alone. Unwanted. Until a familiar voice cut through the noise. Brave of you to come solo. Lila turned to find Harper Vale slipping into the chair beside her, draped in cream and contempt. Brave of you to leak a contract you weren't supposed to have access to. Harper tilted her glass toward her. Nothing illegal about public records. Nothing noble either. Lila, Harper said with an indulgent smile, this world doesn't reward nobility. It rewards control. Which is why Dominic's always been 3 steps ahead. Until now, Lila refused to flinch. He'll figure it out. Harper's expression darkened. Dominic doesn't forgive perceived betrayal. Ask anyone who's ever crossed him. Lila wanted to say something sharp. Instead, she said nothing, and that silence made Harper smirk. A victory. That evening, Dominic stood alone in the penthouse again, staring at the black and white image of Lila at the luncheon. She sat alone, elegant but isolated. Her smile. A mask he now recognized too well. Rachel stood behind him with a tablet of PR damage control strategies. He ignored her. She's handling it better than you are, Rachel said flatly. And she went. Alone. That earns her something. Dominic exhaled. She lied. She didn't lie. She just didn't tell you about something from before she met you. She applied to launch a competing label. Rachel looked up. And still signed on to work for you instead. That says more than a resume. He didn't respond. The silence in the penthouse was heavy again, but this time it didn't feel like power. It felt like loss. He walked to the design table, where Lila's notebook still sat, filled with sketches no one else had seen. He flipped to the page with the thorned rose design, a motif she kept returning to. Fierce. Beautiful. Self-protective. He had seen that in her, hadn't he? Even before all this. Before the lie. Before the kiss. Before the part where pretending stopped feeling safe. That night, Lila lay awake on the guest bed, staring at the ceiling as the shadows shifted like ghosts. Her phone vibrated. Dominic, you were right. About ambition not being betrayal. Dominic, I'm sorry. I froze. I hurt you. Dominic. I'd like to talk. She stared at the words, the ache between her ribs dull and growing. Lila. We can talk in the morning. Lila. But this can't happen again. If we're pretending to be in love, you don't get to abandon me when it's inconvenient. A pause. Dominic. Understood. Dominic's. I won't disappear again. Dominic, you're not alone in this. And for the first time all day, her shoulders softened. Chapter 3. Blurred Lines. The car curved along the Hudson Valley Road like a ribbon, unraveling through gold-touched trees, late autumn burnishing the world in sepia and fire. Lila watched the blur of branches from the back seat of Dominic's Range Rover, arms folded, body tucked into the leather upholstery, as though it might shield her from the closeness beside her. Dominic hadn't said a word since they left the city, but silence didn't mean absence. She could feel his presence like static in the air, the faint scent of cedar cologne, the tension in his posture, the way his fingers flexed against the steering wheel every few minutes, like he was fighting words back. They were headed to Blackstone's private retreat, a stone and glass weekend home nestled in the Catskills. Ostensibly, it was for image repair, a romantic escape captured subtly on Lila's curated Instagram and monitored by a few conveniently tipped-off paparazzi. But the PR machine wasn't riding in the car with them. Just two people, pretending not to drown. Lila finally broke the quiet. "You could have at least let me pack my own bags." Dominic's gaze stayed on the road. "You hate packing. You've said it 4 times. She blinked. "You remember that?" His mouth quirked barely. "I listen. Sometimes." She looked away, unsure what to do with that. The sky outside began to soften into peach and plum. Somewhere between the hum of tires and the rustle of trees, a question she didn't mean to ask slipped out. "Why did you freeze?" He didn't answer right away. The silence was a shift, not a retreat like a curtain being drawn slowly. "I've seen ambition used like a knife," he said finally, "especially up close." Lila turned toward him. "And you thought I'd cut you with mine." "I didn't know," he said, softer now. "I saw possibility, leverage, and I reacted like it was threat." The honesty was unexpected. It made something stir in her chest, reluctant and fragile. She nodded slowly. "I get it. I've had to fight to be seen, too. It makes you guarded." He looked at her then, not the way one looks at a problem or a partner, but like he was seeing her for the first time. "I didn't expect you to be brave," he said. "But you are." A beat of silence passed. Then another. And she realized. This wasn't just a truce. This was the beginning of something unspoken. The retreat was carved into the mountain itself, stone walls with vast panes of glass, a wood-burning fireplace, and minimalist furniture that whispered elegance in hushed tones. Nature bled into every corner: oak beams, slate floors, windows that framed the trees like paintings. Lila walked through it slowly, brushing her fingers across the cool marble island, the glass railing along the stairs. "This place is overkill?" Dominic asked, setting their bags by the doorway. "Stunning," she corrected. "Like if an art museum and a Scandinavian spa had a love child." He allowed a brief smile. "It was my mother's project. She designed every room before she died." Lila looked up. "I didn't know she was an architect." She wasn't. She just believed beauty should be lived in, not hung on a wall. Lila didn't know what surprised her more, that Dominic's mother had designed something so emotionally tactile, or that he shared it. He led her upstairs to the guest suite. "You'll sleep here. Separate rooms. Your call." She nodded, grateful and disappointed in a way she didn't want to examine. He paused in the doorway. "I'll start a fire downstairs. Dinner's in an hour." Later, the fire crackled in the hearth like it had secrets to keep. The windows reflected the darkening woods, and outside, wind curled through the trees like breath. Dominic set down a plate in front of her: grilled salmon, roasted carrots, wine so red it looked like velvet in a glass. "You cooked this?" she asked, stunned. He shrugged. "I like control. It extends to the kitchen." She took a bite and groaned softly. "God, you're talented and infuriating. It's unfair." He smiled, really smiled, and something inside her stuttered. "I'm not infallible," he said, lifting his glass. "To truce?" Lila raised hers. "To truce." They drank. The wine bloomed warm in her chest. Conversation drifted. Softer now. Less curated. He told her about building his brand from scratch, how he started sewing in college because he couldn't afford the labels he admired. She told him about growing up in Miami, how her abuela taught her to hand-stitch hems when she was 7. He laughed when she mimicked her grandmother's voice. She leaned into the sound like sunlight. And somewhere between shared stories and the sound of the fire, the air changed. Not tension, not performance, but gravity. She looked up and found his gaze on her, not analyzing, not appraising. Just watching. Like she was a question he didn't know how to ask yet. The space between them hummed. "Dominic," she said quietly, "what are we doing?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out and gently touched her wrist just barely. And she didn't pull away. The storm arrived without warning. Thunder rumbled over the hills like a warning growl. Rain came next, thick, relentless sheets that lashed against the glass walls of the mountain retreat, turning the world outside into an abstract watercolor of shadows and streaks. Lila stood at the window in her borrowed knit sweater, barefoot, a mug of tea warming her hands. Behind her, the fire sputtered and danced. She could feel him before she saw him. Dominic's presence always arrived like weather calm, then consuming. "You like storms?" he asked softly, from somewhere behind her. "They remind me I don't control everything," she murmured, not turning around. "It's strangely comforting." He joined her at the window. "I hate them. They make me feel exposed." She glanced up at him. His face was turned toward the trees, jaw clenched, eyes fixed beyond the storm. The lightning lit him in flashes, all plains and stillness. He looked like a sculpture carved from thought and restraint. "You don't let people in easily," she said. "No. A pause. I learned not to." She waited. He didn't elaborate. She didn't push. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It had matured grown limbs, settled into the space like something living. And then, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, hummed, and went out. Just like that, they stood in darkness, save for the flickering firelight that painted their skin in gold and shadow. "Well," Lila said, turning toward him. "That's subtle." Dominic's mouth curled. "The generator should kick in. Eventually." She set her mug down. "In the meantime, I guess it's just the two of us." And mood lighting. He looked at her then. Really looked. The fire's glow softened her, but her gaze was steady, no longer hiding behind sarcasm or distance. He moved closer, slow, like the moment itself needed permission. "Lila." She raised an eyebrow. "Dominic, I don't know what this is turning into," he said, voice low. "But it's not just PR anymore." Her breath hitched. "I know." The space between them disappeared like a pulled thread. He lifted his hand, paused. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, trailing it behind her ear. The contact was featherlight, but volcanic in its intensity. Lila's pulse surged. "If you kiss me now, it won't be for the cameras." "I'm not thinking about the cameras." His voice was a rasp. Their faces were close enough now to feel the shared breath between them, close enough to make a decision. She tilted her face toward him just slightly. An invitation, but not surrender. And he stopped, just short of her lips. The restraint vibrated between them like a wire pulled taut. His hand fell away. "Not like this," he said, voice rough. "Not until I know it's real." Lila swallowed hard, something fluttering and aching in her throat. What if it already is? Dominic exhaled, like the wind had been knocked out of him. "Then I need to unlearn every way I've been taught to ruin good things." She reached for his hand, laced her fingers through his. "Then start here," she said softly. They didn't kiss that night, but they sat by the fire for hours. She told him about the first dress she ever made from tablecloth scraps, how she used a stapler before she learned to sew. He told her about boarding school in Switzerland, the loneliness that curled behind achievement, how he once won a design competition and had no one to tell. He didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't offer it. Instead, she gave him her stories. And he gave her his silences, the kind that weren't empty, but sacred. By the time they fell asleep on the oversized couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist, the storm had passed. But the thing between them, the ache, the heat, the promise of what could be, it had just begun. The next morning, sunlight spilled over hardwood floors, gentle and forgiving. Lila stirred awake to the smell of coffee and something warm. Dominic stood in the kitchen in a t-shirt and flannel pajama pants, two things she never expected him to own. He poured batter onto a hot skillet like a man who'd done this 100 times. "You cook pancakes too?" she asked, stretching. He looked over his shoulder. "You looked like you needed comfort food." She padded barefoot across the room, wrapping herself in the flannel throw from the couch. "Last night, it felt real." It was. She studied his face. Open, unmasked, beautiful, in a quiet, dangerous way. And something inside her cracked. "What happens when we go back?" she asked. His jaw tightened. "We go back to pretending. But not here." "No." His voice dropped. "Here. It's just us." She nodded, heart aching with the complexity of it all. Two people, one lie, and 1,000 truths they didn't know how to name. Chapter 4. Torn Seams. The boardroom at Blackstone headquarters was nothing short of a battlefield disguised in glass and steel. Its panoramic view of Manhattan, the towering ceilings, the table carved from reclaimed French oak, it all screamed dominance, power, precision. And today, Lila sat at that table, not beside Dominic. Across from him, the seat was symbolic, intentional. She wasn't playing the accessory anymore. She was part of the conversation, but that didn't mean she was welcomed. Across the polished surface, 12 members of the Blackstone board flicked through proposal packets with carefully measured disinterest. Most of them were men in crisp suits, their expressions refined into something just short of derision. A few smiled at her like she was ornamental, pretty, temporary. Except for Yvette Moreau, an elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair wrapped into a chignon and eyes that missed nothing. She watched Lila not with scorn, but with curiosity. Lila smoothed her palm along the lapel of her ivory blazer, one she had designed herself and stitched last year when she couldn't afford anything but fabric scraps and drive. Dominic was speaking cool, composed. Which brings us to the spring preview collection. The bridal expansion and the proposed co-branded capsule line have both been accelerated based on recent engagement press. A few board members chuckled politely. Dominique didn't. This momentum, he continued, is an opportunity, but we need innovation, not just publicity. That's why I've asked Miss Gomez to contribute a limited design concept, 5 pieces, fully authored under the Blackstone banner. In collaboration with the core team, there was a beat of silence. Then, an assistant designing for Blackstone. One of the men scoffed. Is this nepotism or performance art? Lila didn't flinch. Dominic's expression didn't change, but the air shifted. She's not an assistant today, he said. She's a designer, with a concept approved by me. The room bristled. Lila folded her hands. You're not being asked to invest in charity. Just vision. Yvette leaned forward. And what is that vision, Miss Gomez? Lila opened the folder in front of her and slid out a single sheet, a sketched silhouette of a bridal suit. Clean lines. Asymmetrical tailoring. A cascade of white organza structured like armor. Not every bride dreams of tulle and submission, she said, voice clear. Some want elegance without erasure. Strength without apology. The words hovered. Yvette smiled faintly. And this is your first pitch? No, Lila said. It's just the first time someone's bothered to listen. Back in his office, Dominic watched the city bleed light across glass as he loosened his tie. You were impressive in there, he said, as Lila stepped in, still flushed from the boardroom heat. They hated me. They hated what they couldn't control. She leaned against the doorway. You didn't have to back me that hard. Yes, I did. He looked at her. You're not a placeholder, Lila. You're the reason the brand still feels alive. The compliment landed somewhere deeper than her chest. It wrapped around something raw. You didn't say that to them, she said softly. I don't owe them my truth. You owe it to me. Dominic's jaw flexed. His walls went up an inch. You're not just part of this because of a ring, fake or not. You're here because you earned it. Her eyes shimmered not with tears, but with something fiercer. Then treat me like it. He stepped closer. I am. The air tightened. Her breath caught. But before the space between them could collapse, the door opened, and Harper walked in. Uninvited. She was flawless, as always. Blood-red sheath dress. A smile like broken glass. I knocked, she said, not apologizing. Dominic's posture shifted, spine straightening like a blade. This isn't a good time. Harper's gaze flicked between them. I'll be brief. Lila crossed her arms. Of course. You always are when stirring the pot. Harper didn't rise to it. Instead, she laid a thin envelope on Dominic's desk. What's this? He asked. A copy of the development calendar your design team submitted to the European press last month. You'll want to compare it to the original sketches Lila just pitched. Dominic picked it up. His brows lowered as he scanned the contents. Silence bloomed. Lila stepped forward. What is this? Harper's smile was razor-sharp. A timeline discrepancy. Nothing more. Except that a concept uncannily similar to yours was circulating before your pitch. That's a lie, Lila snapped. Of course, Harper said smoothly. But lies make for excellent headlines. Especially when someone is climbing so fast they forget whose work they've seen. Lila's skin flushed cold. You're implying I plagiarized a Blackstone concept? I'm not implying anything. Harper turned, heel pivoting. I'm just offering Dominic a chance to consider how complicated loyalty can get. The door closed behind her like a slap. Dominic turned slowly to Lila. She looked back at him, heart in her throat. Do you believe her? He didn't answer. And that was all the answer she needed. Lila stood frozen in the center of Dominic's office, the silence so thick it pressed against her lungs like smoke. I didn't steal anything, she said, each word deliberate, trembling at the edges. You believe that, right? Dominic's back was to her, his shoulders a fortress. He stared down at the sketches Harper had delivered, comparing timelines, scrawled notes, details. His silence carved something jagged into the room. Dominic? He turned slowly. His face wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was careful, measured, corporate. Lila, he said softly, this isn't about what I believe. It's about what the board will believe, what the press will turn into narrative. She laughed a bitter, disbelieving sound. So now I'm a liability? He didn't answer. And that again was answer enough. Her chest tightened. I trusted you, she whispered. Even after everything, I came into that boardroom and offered them something real, and now I have to prove I didn't plagiarize my own design? His voice was calm, clinical. We'll have the legal team review the timestamps. If it's a misunderstanding, we'll resolve it. Her eyes burned. You're treating me like a headline waiting to happen. I'm protecting the company. No, she snapped. You're protecting yourself. She stepped back like his presence physically repelled her. This whole thing, the fake engagement, the partnership, all of it was supposed to be temporary. I accepted that. But now that it's real, now that it means something to me, you pull back the moment it threatens your perfect little empire. He said nothing, because he couldn't say what she needed to hear. Not now. Not yet. And maybe not ever. By the time Lila returned to her apartment, her real apartment, the cramped one-bedroom in the East Village with peeling paint and a stubborn radiator, her tears had dried, but the storm inside her hadn't passed. She dug out her old sketchbooks. The originals? Her hand moved over the pages, like a mother searching for a lost child. The bridal suit concept was there, just like she remembered, dated, signed, raw. Her ideas had evolved, yes, but the bones were hers. Always had been. She took photos, packaged the documentation, sent them to Rachel with a single-line message. You'll need this when Harper spins her next lie. Then she tossed her phone on the bed and collapsed beside it. And for the first time since the fake engagement had begun, she wished she'd never said yes. Across the city, Dominic stared down at the penthouse bar without touching the drink in his hand. The suite felt cavernous without Lila in it, echoing in all the wrong places. Rachel stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her voice dry and matter-of-fact. She's not lying, she said. We found the metadata. Her sketches were time-stamped weeks before the press leak. Harper referenced, it's not even close. Dominic's jaw clenched. Harper's gunning for blood, Rachel added. This was a power play, and you walked right into it. I hesitated. He said quietly. I treated Lila like a suspect. You treated her like an employee, not a partner. He looked up. Do you think I made a mistake? Rachel didn't answer for a long time. Then, I think you forgot she wasn't just another asset. And she reminded you what it feels like to care. Dominic sat down slowly, his hands resting on his knees. For once, he looked tired, not just physically, but existentially, like someone holding the shattered pieces of something they didn't know how to fix. She's gone, he murmured. Not because of the lie, because of what it revealed. Then maybe it's time to stop performing, Rachel said gently, and start showing up. The next day, Lila sat at her old sewing machine, surrounded by fabric bolts and chaos. No stylists. No boardroom. Just thread and grief. She stitched. It was how she processed pain, pulling beauty from it one seam at a time. But every pull of the needle reminded her of him. Of the night at the cabin. The almost kiss. The confession in his voice when he said, "Not until I know it's real." She had been real. Every second. He just hadn't believed in her enough to say it out loud. Until he did, she was done letting him near her heart. 2 days later, Harper launched a whisper campaign online. Anonymous sources claiming Lila had pitched suspiciously derivative designs. Tabloids ran the story. Hashtags sprouted like mold. But this time, something changed. Because Lila fought back. She released her own sketches, with dates, drafts, voice memos from the design process, clear evidence that her work was original. Rachel released an official Blackstone statement backing her claim. Yvette Moreau posted a rare public endorsement of Lila's unapologetic innovation. The tide began to turn, but the damage personal, not professional, had already rooted itself in her bones. She had believed in a partnership. He had defaulted to power. That night, as Lila prepped materials for a pop-up pitch to local investors, the first real step toward her own label, her phone buzzed. She ignored it. Buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. Dominic's voice. "Lila, I don't deserve your time, but I need you to hear this. I believed in you from the beginning, but I didn't believe you'd stay. That's on me. You were the only person who stood in the fire beside me, and I flinched." A pause. His voice cracked, barely audible. "I'll be at the industry gala tomorrow night. Not as a CEO. Not as a PR stunt. Just as the man who let something real slip away. I hope you'll come. But if you don't, I understand. I'll still be there." Watching the woman I should have never doubted. Lila sat with the phone in her lap, heart pounding. Not from fear. From hope. But hope was dangerous. And she wasn't sure yet if it was worth sewing her heart back together just to risk another tear. Chapter 5. The Gala. The Grand Manhattan Gala was always a spectacle. But tonight, it pulsed with something heavier, like the city itself was holding its breath. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured rainbows onto the white marble floors. Champagne flutes sparkled in midair. And beneath the glitter and gowns, New York's fashion elite gathered in curated tension jaws, sharp, rumors sharper. Lila stood at the edge of it all in a dress she'd made with her own hands. A slip of molten gold satin, sculpted with asymmetrical seams, a daring open back, and a subtle shoulder drape, like armor softness and strength. Side by side, her hair was swept up, her collarbones bare. No juvelry. No apology. If they were going to whisper about her, they'd have to look her in the eye while they did it. She stepped into the gala alone, but every head turned. Cameras clicked. She heard her name hissed from manicured mouths, a mixture of curiosity and caution. Not as a scandal now, but as a threat. Lila Gomez. The voice came from her left, smooth, sharp. Harper Vale. Of course, she wore white, a deliberate contrast. The kind of white that dared the world to look for stains. Lila stopped, chin high. Harper. Harper circled her slowly, like a lion appraising another predator. "I'll admit," she said, "you cleaned up well after that little scandal. The press loves a redemption arc." Lila smiled sweetly. They love the woman who writes her own ending even more. Harper's eyes narrowed. "Don't get comfortable. The next time you fall, no one will catch you." "I didn't fall," Lila said, stepping past her. "You just tried to trip me and missed." And with that, she walked into the center of the ballroom. Dominic watched from the mezzanine balcony. He saw her before she saw him. Of course he did. She always drew the eye. Not because of drama. Because of presence. Unflinching. Alive. His heart ached just watching her. She looked untouchable tonight. Gorgeous, regal, self-forged. But he knew better. He knew the way she chewed the inside of her cheek when she was nervous. The way she tapped her fingers 3 times before speaking in meetings. The way her laugh cracked open at the edges when she was surprised. He remembered the way she felt, curled against him in firelight, and how cold everything had been since He left the balcony and descended into the light. Lila had made it to the edge of the dance floor when she felt him. She turned, and there he was. Dominic Black in black tailored tux, crisp shirt, no tie, barely tamed hair, collar slightly askew, like he'd run a hand through it 100 times tonight. His armor was cracked, and something honest flickered beneath. The crowd parted as he approached. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Not at first. Then, "You came." "I wasn't going to," she said. "But then I realized I deserved to be here." He nodded, slow. "You always did." A beat. The music swelled. A cello hummed in the background. He held out his hand. "Dance with me?" She stared at it, then placed hers inside. They stepped onto the floor. The world faded. It wasn't a fast song. It wasn't flashy. But the way he moved with her like gravity had finally given up resisting was enough. His hand rested low on her back. Her other hand slid to his shoulder. Their bodies remembered each other, even if their minds still hesitated. He leaned close. "I wanted to say this when it wasn't a performance." "Then say it," she whispered. "I duped you. And not because of Harper, because of me." She looked up. His voice thickened. "Because I never believed I could have something good that didn't come with strings. Because I've only ever trusted people who left." Her breath caught. It continued. "But you stayed. You showed up. Even when I didn't." She searched his face. This wasn't the CEO. This wasn't the strategist. This was the man, and she had loved him quietly since the moment he let her see beneath the steel. "I'm sorry I made you feel disposable," he said. "I see you now. All of you." Another beat. And then, quieter, "I don't want this to be pretend anymore." Her heart jumped. But years of armor whispered caution. "So what is it then?" she asked. "A PR correction? A new contract?" "No." His voice cracked. "It's a real man asking a real woman to forgive him, and maybe someday trust him again." She didn't respond immediately. She needed to know it wasn't just regret talking, that it wasn't just guilt or loneliness, that it was love. He saw the question in her eyes, so he answered it the only way he knew how. He pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "I love you." Lila's breath stilled between them. His words hung in the air, soft as silk, sharp as needles. "I love you." It wasn't grand. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was real. Too real. The music played on, as if unaware that the axis of her world had tilted. She didn't pull away. But she didn't answer either. Her hands trembled slightly where they rested on Dominic's shoulder. He noticed. "Of course he did." "I know it's too soon to ask for anything back," he murmured, voice low against her ear. "But I needed to say it before I lost the chance." She pulled back just enough to see his face unguarded now, painfully sincere. "I don't know what to do with that," she admitted, her voice barely a breath. "You made me believe this was all strategy. A show. You made me feel like my worth was measured in column inches." "I know," he said, "and I hate that I did." Around them, the ballroom buzzed with champagne laughter and camera flashes. But within their slow orbit, there was only them. No Harper. No boardroom. No headlines. "Everything changed the night of that storm," he continued. "When the power went out and you didn't need lights to see right through me. You were real when everything else in my life was curated." Her lips parted, but the words tangled somewhere behind her ribs. He cupped her cheek, gentle, reverent, not possessive, not performative. A man asking for permission, not forgiveness. "I want to build something that doesn't disappear when the press cycle ends," he said. "Something with you. Not for PR. Not for damage control. For us." Tears pricked the backs of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I need to trust that you see me," she said, voice trembling. "Not just as a designer. Not as your almost fiancé. But as a whole, woman with a dream you can't own or manage or protect from scandal." "I see you," he said. "And I won't give up my label. Even if it makes us competitors one day." He smiled, slow and steady. "Then I'll just have to work harder." She laughed, the sound watery and bright. The music shifted into a new tempo, and couples swirled around them like petals in the wind. Leila stepped back. Dominic stilled, waiting. But then she reached for his hand. Not to pull him in, to lead him forward. Later, as the gala emptied and the chandeliers dimmed, they stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. The city stretched below, glittering and endless. Leila leaned against the stone ledge, arms folded, her gold dress shimmering in the night breeze. Dominic joined her, close but not touching. "Do you remember," she said, "the first day I started working for you? You told me to make myself invisible." He winced. That was inexcusable. She turned to him, a quiet smile on her lips. It was honest. And necessary. Because if you hadn't, I wouldn't have worked so hard to prove I was worth seeing. He looked down at her. "You never had to prove that to me. You just had to stop being afraid to admit it." He nodded. "I'm not afraid anymore." They stood there for a long time, the silence soft now, companionable. "Do you think," she asked, "that something born out of a lie can still become something true?" He turned to her fully. "I think," he said, "that some truths need time to arrive, but when they do, they stay." She studied him for a moment. Then slowly, delicately, she leaned in. Her lips touched his. No audience. No cameras. No deals. Just the truth of it. And it was quiet. And it was everything. The next morning, headlines flooded the fashion world. Dominic Black and Leila Gomez confirm real engagement, no PR, just passion. The bride wears gold. The woman who rewrote the Blackstone romance. Insiders confirm Leila Gomez to launch independent label with Blackstone investment support. But Leila didn't read them. She was busy. At her new studio, the one Dominic had leased in her name. The walls were bare for now, the sewing machines humming, her sketches spread across a long drafting table. Swatches of bold fabric lined the wall like paint samples from a future only she could imagine. Dominic leaned in the doorway, watching her with a cup of coffee in each hand. "No press today?" she teased. "I told them I was busy assisting a genius." She smirked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Did you bring oat milk?" "I'm learning," he said, offering her the right cup. She took it, their fingers brushing. In the silence that followed, no lies lived between them. Only beginning. Chapter 6. Building from Ruins. Leila stood in the center of her studio, surrounded by chaos, and for the first time in her life, it felt like home. Bolts of fabric leaned against the wall like exhausted dancers. Pattern drafts littered every surface. A dress form stood in the corner wearing the rough beginnings of her first signature piece. A midnight blue jumpsuit tailored like a tuxedo but draped like silk, commanding feminine, fluid, and her name, her own name, was on the window. Gomez. In bold lettering, against the New York skyline. No longer in anyone's shadow. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to the table, where swatches were arranged like battle plans. "Midnight silk or structured crepe?" she asked. Dominic, seated on a bench near the window with his sleeves rolled up and a sketchbook in his lap, looked up thoughtfully. "Crepe," he said. "It holds shape better under stage lights. And your model's walk needs power." Leila raised a brow. "You're getting good at this." He smirked. "I was trained by the best." Their rhythm had become easy, too easy, maybe. Each morning, he arrived with coffee and silence. Not hovering, not directing, just being there. A constant, but constancy, she'd learned, wasn't always comfort. Sometimes it was pressure in disguise. And lately, it pressed. Later that afternoon, the studio buzzed with interns, stylists, and investors scheduled for a walkthrough. Leila changed into clean trousers and a white button-down with rolled sleeves, sharp, professional. The uniform of a woman who had something to prove. Dominic remained by the door, fielding calls on his Bluetooth and issuing quiet instructions to his assistant. He was present but distant today, toggling between two worlds, hers and the one she'd sworn to carve without him hovering like a safety net. Rachel arrived midway through with a thick manila folder and a pair of killer heels that clicked with purpose. "I have numbers," she said, waving the folder at Leila. "Early projections are excellent. The press wants exclusives. Investors are circling. But," There's one thing. Leela's stomach dipped. What now? Rachel flipped open a page. Harper Vale is launching a competing capsule line. Same release week. Samma block. Leela blinked. She's not even subtle anymore. Nope, Rachel said, chewing her gum without shame. She's gone full villain. Custom fabric from your previous supplier. Word is, she's calling it redefined elegance. Sound familiar? Dominic's voice cut in from the doorway. It's a direct hit. Lila turned toward him. Did you know? He nodded. My team caught wind of it yesterday. I didn't want to distract you. Her jaw tensed. I can handle distraction. What I can't handle is sabotage dressed in silk. Rachel handed her a card. We'll need a strategy. Press pre-release. Behind-the-scenes footage. And... She hesitated. And? Harper just signed a former Blackstone model. The face of your bridal concept campaign. Lila's blood ran cold. Dominic pushed off the wall. We'll find another face. Better. More aligned. But something in Lila's chest curled inward. It wasn't just the loss of a model. It was the message. Harper was telling her, you don't belong here. You're a fluke. A fantasy. And deep down, Lila feared the same thing. That night, the studio was empty, except for the hum of a desk lamp and the sound of Leela's pencil dragging across tracing paper. Dominic lingered in the doorway, watching her from a distance. You haven't eaten, he said. I'm not hungry. He stepped inside. You're spiraling. I'm working. You're chasing perfection like it'll protect you. She dropped her pencil. Don't psychoanalyze me, Dominitz. Not tonight. He didn't flinch. I'm trying to help. She turned toward him, eyes flashing. That's the problem. Every time something gets hard, you help. You smooth it out. Shield me. You make it look easy, but that's not how this works. I know that. No, you don't. You built your empire over a decade. You've already fought your battles. I'm still in the trenches, and if you keep stepping in, I'll never know if I won because I earned it or because you protected me from losing. Silence. Then, you think I'm making you weak. I think I'm making me weak by depending on you. He took a slow breath, then crossed the room. Do you know what it costs me not to step in? He asked, voice low. To watch you get hit. When all I want to do is block the blow? She swallowed. It continued. I don't want to be your protector. I want to be your partner. But if you need space to fight this on your own, then I'll give it to you. She looked up at him. And for once, he looked tired. Not from her. From holding back. From caring. From not knowing how to care the right way. I don't want space, she said finally. I want to know that if I fall, you'll let me hit the ground, but be the one to help me stand. Dominic reached for her hand. And this time he didn't lead. He followed. The showroom smelled like steel and ambition. Lila stepped into Harper Vale's private preview at the Manhattan Design Consortium as if entering enemy territory. Her heels were sharp, her blazer sharper. She'd come alone by choices. Rachel had warned her, don't give Harper the attention she wants. She's baiting you. But Lila wasn't here to bite. She was here to stand. Dozens of industry elites lingered among racks of crimson silk and structured gowns that mimicked some of Lila's signatures just a little too closely. Champagne was passed on silver trays. Music purred in the background. And Harper, of course, stood in the center like a queen in her court. Their eyes met instantly. Lila, Harper called out with a mock surprised smile. Didn't expect you so early. Oh, at all. Lila walked forward, calm. Each step a declaration. Nice setup, she said, glancing around. Almost distracts from the recycled ideas. Harper's smile widened, eyes glittering with something cold. Inspiration is a shared language, darling. Not when the translator is a thief. A few heads turned. Harper waved a hand like brushing away a speck of dust. You're emotional. I'd be too, if I were launching a line with no legacy to support it. Lila's pulse tickled on her skin, but her voice stayed steady. You think I came to fight, she said, but I came to thank you. Harper blinked. Excuse me? You reminded me of something. That power built on fear collapses the second someone stops being afraid of you. She leaned closer. Her tone, now a whisper, only Harper could hear. And I stopped being afraid the moment I realized you're just another woman, terrified of being replaced by someone who didn't need permission to succeed. Harper's expression cracked. Just slightly, but it was enough. Lila turned and walked away before Harper could reply, heels clicking like a countdown. Back at her studio, the calm shattered. Rachel was already inside, pacing in front of the mood board with a phone pressed to her ear. Dominic arrived seconds later, tension written in the slope of his shoulders. "What's going on?" Lila asked, dropping her bag. Rachel hung up. "We've been hit." Lila's stomach dropped. "What kind of hit?" "Your final look, the gold organza wrap gown you've been hiding for the finale. It's been leaked. Full design. Front and back. On Fashion Crave. Time-stamped 30 minutes ago." Lila froze. No one outside the studio had access. Dominic's voice was flat. "Except your assistants. And 2 of mine." Rachel passed over her phone. The leaked images glowed on the screen, raw, intimate, stolen. Dominic stepped away, already dialing. "I'll lock down every channel. We'll issue a cease and desist." Lila barely heard him. Her gaze was fixed on the screen, her heart pounding like it might break through her ribs. That dress had been her signature, her message to the world, and now it belonged to everyone before it had belonged to her. Later that night, the studio was dark. Dominic sat across from her in silence, 2 untouched mugs of tea between them. "I should have protected it better," Lila said. "It wasn't your fault." She looked at him. "That's the second time you've said that. But what if it was? What if I wanted this too fast, too loud, too much?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Wanting something doesn't make you reckless. It makes you alive." She studied him. "You've never doubted your place." He gave a dry laugh. "Every damn day. I just got better at hiding it." Lila rubbed her temples. "That dress was everything. Now it's gone." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. "You're still here," he said. "You still have your name, your vision, your voice." He stood, walked to the wall, and pulled down a blank sheet of sketch paper. He placed it in front of her. "Then prove it. Design something better." She stared at the blank page. It looked like failure. It looked like beginning. Her fingers hovered over the pencil for a long moment. Then she picked it up and began to draw. 2 days before the show, a new dress came to life in silence. Lila designed without music, without noise, without outside input. She barely ate. She slept on the studio couch. Her hands ached. Her eyes burned. But she created, not to recover the lost piece, to surpass it, to outgrow it. The final gown was unlike anything she'd done before. Black velvet, sculpted like a second skin, with a high collar and a sharp, plunging back. The train shimmered with hand-sewn metallic thread, thousands of tiny constellations blooming across fabric like galaxies in motion. It was bolder. It was hers, and no one else had seen it, not even Dominic. On the eve of the show, Lila stood alone in the studio. The dress waited on the mannequin like a secret. Dominic arrived quietly. He didn't ask to see it. He simply offered his hand. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So was I," he said, "when I realized I didn't want a legacy without you in it." She looked up. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because tomorrow, everything would change. And tonight they were still here, side by side, threaded together by something stronger than performance. Something real. Chapter 7. The Runway. The backstage of New York Fashion Week was chaos wrapped in velvet. Steam hissed from irons. Models paced like elegant jungle cats. Stylists barked into headsets. Lila stood in the eye of the storm, calm, precise, alive. Her collection, Rebirth, hung on gold racks behind her like armor awaiting battle. 12 looks. 12 pieces that told the story of a girl who'd once sewn hems in a kitchen and now stood on the brink of becoming something bigger than anyone expected, including herself. Her hands trembled slightly as she zipped up the finale model, the velvet galaxy gown, a celestial rebellion against the dress that had been stolen. Each thread, each starburst of metallic embroidery was sewn with her fury, her hope, and her refusal to vanish. "You okay?" Rachel asked, gently straightening a hem. "I think I'm too tired to be nervous," Lila replied. Rachel snorted. "You've been too brave to be scared since the moment you walked into Blackstone with a notebook and a $7 sandwich." They shared a quick, meaningful glance. Gratitude without words. From the other side of the curtain, the music swelled low, rhythmic, and rising like a heartbeat. "You're on in 60 seconds, called the stage manager. Dominique hadn't arrived. Not yet. And for some reason, that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. But she couldn't wait. The lights dimmed. The show began. The first model stepped onto the runway in a steel-gray deconstructed suit with draped chiffon sleeves and razor-sharp tailoring. The crowd shifted, interested. Watching. Click. Flash. Whispers. The second look. A rose-gold corset dress with a sculpted spine of stitched beads, delicate and deadly. By the fourth model, the room had changed. Silence. Focus. The kind of attention usually reserved for legacy names, not first-timers. Lila stood just behind the curtain, heart thundering in her chest, watching her dreams walk toward the future. Each piece was more daring than the last. Masculine silhouettes softened with movement, silk blazers paired with combat boots, gowns that moved like water but hit like poetry. Her message was clear. Strength was not the absence of softness, it was its evolution. And then, Model 11 excited, which meant the next would be the finale. Lila held her breath. But just as the final model stepped into position, everything froze. A voice pierced the silence from the front row. "Excuse me." It was Harper. Of course. She stood slowly, a tablet in her hand, her voice louder now. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, walking toward the center aisle like she owned it. "But I think the audience deserves to know this designer's finale gown was not entirely her own." Gasps. Lila's heart slammed into her ribs. Rachel swore under her breath. "What is she?" Harper turned the tablet to the crowd. A photo. A blurry image, one of Lila's early drafts for the stolen gold gown. Images of this piece were leaked last week, weeks before her so-called reinvention. Is this truly a rebirth? Or a rebranding of stolen work? Cameras flickered. The room shifted from admiration to uncertainty. Lila stepped forward, instinct burning in her throat. But before she could speak, another voice rang out. "Dominic." From the second row, calm, powerful, lethal. "That's enough." Harper turned. Lila froze. He stood slowly, every inch the CEO again, but this time it wasn't Dominic Black, fashion mogul. It was the man who had learned to stand beside her, not in front of her. He walked into the spotlight without fear. "I authorized the original gold gown months ago, under a temporary design protection clause, between Gomez Studio and Blackstone," he said. The leak wasn't a failure of integrity. It was industrial theft. And the original designs are time-stamped, filed, and registered under her intellectual property. He turned toward the crowd. "She didn't rebrand," he said. "She rebuilt. And I should know, because I watched her do it. Stitch by stitch." The room was quiet again. Dominic's eyes met Lila's full of certainty, full of faith. He turned back to Harper. "Now sit down. The finale's about to begin." Harper's face darkened, but the damage was done hers, not Lila's. She returned to her seat, but the crown she wore so carelessly cracked just a little. Lila gave the cue. The curtain lifted. The final model stepped forward, and the gown, black velvet, stars, defiance. The room inhaled, then exhaled in awe. Applause rose like thunder. Cameras flashed, and Lila, standing behind the curtain, felt something bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with fame or validation. It was something older, stronger, freedom. After the show, Dominic found her backstage, still catching her breath, still stunned by the magnitude of it all. She didn't speak right away. Neither did he. Then quietly she said, "You didn't have to defend me out there." He stepped closer. "I didn't. I wanted to." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," he said, reaching for her hand. "Just let me keep standing in your corner." Lila looked at him. The lights, the crowd, the whispers, none of it mattered. Only this. Only him. Only her. "I don't need a corner," she said. "I need a partner." His smile was slow. "Sure. Then, let's build something. Together." And for the first time, it wasn't a line. It wasn't a deal. It wasn't a performance. It was real. The after-party was everything Lila once dreamed of, and nothing she expected. Flashbulbs bathed the rooftop in white light. Industry legends offered flutes of champagne. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages from magazines, influencers, investors. Everyone wanted a piece of her now. But Lila stood near the edge of the terrace, alone for a moment, watching Manhattan glitter like a lover too pretty to trust. It was happening. The success, the attention, the moment. And yet, she didn't feel like she'd arrived. She felt like she was just now beginning. "You look like someone who just conquered Rome," came Dominic's voice behind her. She turned slowly. "Does that make you the general or the crowd?" He approached, a smile ghosting his lips. "Neither. Just the idiot who finally figured out he wasn't supposed to win alone." She let out a slow breath. "It's overwhelming. I know. Everyone wants something now. They didn't even see me 6 months ago. They see you now," he said softly. "But only you get to decide what they mean when they look." She studied him. "That's very poetic." "I had help," he replied, his eyes resting on her with unflinching warmth. "You." A pause. Then, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small, square box. Lila's stomach dropped. "Dominic?" "Wait," he said, not opening it yet. "Before you panic, it's not that." He exhaled, nervous for once. "It's a partnership agreement. For you, 100% creative control. Equal equity. No interference. Not even from me." She blinked. "You're offering full backing?" "I'm offering belief," he said. "No performance. No press leverage. Just me. Showing up." She stared at the box, then at him. "You really know how to mix business with intimacy. Only when it's the right person." The space between them filled with something quiet and charged. "Dominic." Her voice caught. "I love you," he said again, not like a plea, but a truth. "And I want to build something that doesn't vanish when the lights go out." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I've spent my whole life fighting to be seen," she said. "And now the world's finally looking. I need to be sure I can still see myself in the spotlight." "I'll remind you," he said gently. "If you ever forget." Her hand reached up tentative, then certain. She cupped his cheek. "You don't make it easy to stay mad." "I make a lot of things difficult," he said with a smirk. She kissed him. Not like fire. Not like fury. Like faith. Like a yes. Later that night, photos of the kiss circled social media, but none of them captured the truth. Not the security. Not the stillness. Not the moment after the kiss, when Dominic rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "Let's take our time." No headlines. No stunts. Just us. And Lila whispered back, "Only if you wear less black." He laughed. And somewhere, in the middle of the skyline and the champagne and the camera clicks, two people who had pretended for everyone else finally stopped pretending for themselves. The next morning, Rebirth trended in 21 countries. Gomez Studio received 3 partnership offers and 2 Vogue covers. But Lila didn't check her email right away. She woke late, tangled in crisp white sheets, and Dominic's arm slung lazily across her waist. Her body sore from stress and heels and emotion. Sunlight filtered into the loft they'd returned to after the after-party, a quiet place, away from flashing lights. She turned toward him, watching his lashes flicker against sleep. "You awake?" she whispered. "Since you kissed me last night in front of all of Manhattan, he muttered. She grinned. You didn't seem to mind. He opened one eye. I minded that it took us this long. She laughed, soft and bright. For a moment, they lay in the hush of something rare. Contentment. No tension. No schemes. No scripts. Just the truth of two people who had chosen each other. Not for business. Not for optics. But because, somehow, against every odd, their broken pieces fit. Chapter 8. The First Crack. The morning sunlight poured through the studio windows in golden ribbons, warming bolts of silk and casting fractured light across the glass-topped drafting table. Lila sat at her desk, hunched over swatch books, a fresh espresso cooling beside her. Her phone buzzed every few seconds with messages from stylists, fashion editors, and boutique buyers, but her focus kept drifting to the unopened email at the top of her inbox. Subject: Urgent, Media Inquiry, Blackstone History. The sender was a journalist from Mode and Motive, a niche but ruthless digital magazine with a reputation for digging past the press release shine and into the soil beneath. Her fingers hovered above the mousepad. She clicked. We're preparing a feature on Gomez Studios' rise and have received anonymous tips about an undisclosed incident from your time at Veroni Academy of Design. An alleged IP dispute involving your final thesis collection. We'd like to give you a chance to comment before publication. Deadline: 24 hours. Lila stared at the screen. The word seemed to throb. Verone. A name she hadn't said aloud in years. A chapter she'd closed without ceremony or closure. Her hands, so steady on fabric, began to tremble. She hadn't stolen anything, but someone had once claimed she did. And now it was back. Just as she was finally standing on her own, across town, Dominic stood at the head of a conference room lined with fashion tech consultants and international buyers, his phone vibrating silently in his pocket. He ignored it. He was in control here, guiding decisions, negotiating global distribution, nodding at trend projections. Yet somewhere under the crisp collar of his charcoal suit, unease threaded its way beneath his ribs. He felt it. The shift. He always did, just before the fall. When the meeting adjourned, he finally checked his messages and saw Rachel's name flashing on screen. Rachel, we've got a problem. Call me now. Lila didn't wait for Dominic. She didn't even wait for Rachel. Instead, she went home, dug through her old portfolio boxes, and pulled out the folder marked Verone 2018. Inside, sketches and fabric samples still carried the scent of ambition back when she thought talent would be enough. Back when she trusted people by default. The accusation had come just days before graduation. Her mentor, Professor Malik, had claimed she'd submitted a design too similar to a classmate whose father donated to the school. A classmate who later admitted privately that he'd taken her work and altered it. But there had never been proof. Only whispers. Lila had chosen silence then. She couldn't afford the fight. She walked away from the honors program. Graduated quietly. Buried the pain. And now, the ghost of that moment stood at her doorstep again. She scanned the file photocopies of old sketches, timestamps, her email appeals to the board, unanswered. She could feel it in her chest, the deep, slow throb of an old wound tearing at its stitches. When Dominic finally reached her, it was past 7. He found her alone in the studio, hunched over her work table, sleeves rolled up, dark circles beneath her eyes. You saw it? She asked before he could speak. He nodded. Rachel sent it to me. It's being shopped around. Right now it's a whisper, but it could become another storm, she said quietly. Dominic stepped closer. We can shut it down. Legal's already drafting statements. We'll deny the accusation, issue a threat to sue, and pull some favors at Mode and Motive. If they lose access to Blackstone, they'll fold. She didn't look at him. It continued. We control the narrative. Lila was silent for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the window. I don't want you to fix this. He frowned. I'm not fixing it. I'm protecting you. That's the same thing. No, he said, voice low. Not when your name's on the line. Not when they're coming for you. Not me. She turned to him, eyes bright with fury, but it wasn't aimed at him. Not really. I've spent my whole career being dismissed. As an assistant, as a puppet, as a woman. Now, finally, I have my own name on a label. And the first scandal that shows up, you want to bury it? He softened. You think I don't understand what it means to own something fragile? I built Blackstone from nothing, Lila. I know. But you never had to prove you belonged in the room the way I do. The words settled between them, raw and heavy. Dominic stepped back slightly. I'm sorry, he said. You're right. She blinked. He rarely admitted fault. He sighed. I wanted to take it off your plate. Lila's expression softened. You can't. Not this time. A long pause passed before she added, quietly, I'm going to talk to the press. On my terms, I'm going to tell the truth. Dominic inhaled. Even if it backfires? Especially then, she said, because I'm done pretending my past doesn't exist. He looked at her, eyes full of something deeper than admiration. Respect. You're braver than I was when they came for me, he said. She gave him a small, tired smile. That's because I know you'll still be here when it's over. He stepped forward, pressed a kiss to her forehead. I'm not going anywhere. The studio lights felt hotter than they should have. Lila sat across from journalist Grace Lynn of The Fold, a digital platform known for its integrity, nuance, and crucially, its refusal to spin scandal for clicks. The interview was her idea. No filters, no pre-approved talking points. No, Dominic. Just the truth. Grace adjusted the lapel mic clipped to Lila's blouse. Whenever you're ready. Lila took a breath, the kind that came from below her ribs. Let's talk about Verone, she said. Outside the studio, Dominic watched through a glass partition, Rachel by his side. She's going to crush it, Rachel said under her breath, but Dominic heard the uncertainty stitched into her confidence. She's walking straight into fire, he replied. She's not walking, Rachel said. She's leading. On camera, Lila's voice was calm but steady. 4 years ago, during my final term at Verone Academy of Design, I was accused of copying another student's work. There was no formal investigation. Just pressure. Just silence. I didn't fight back. I didn't have the resources. I was 21. Tired. Alone. She glanced down for a breath, then looked back up, eyes clear. I know now that silence is complicity. And I won't be complicit in my own erasure ever again. Grace nodded, letting her speak without interruption. I didn't steal anything, but the accusation stayed, even when I got jobs. Even when I succeeded, it sat in the shadows like a waiting mouth, ready to devour the version of me that had finally found light. She paused, then added, softer now. If you're waiting for a clean, perfect story, you won't get one. I'm not perfect. I've been scared. I've been stubborn. But I've also been honest, and that matters. Grace leaned forward. What do you say to the people who still believe the rumor? Lila met the camera lens. I say, if someone else's lie is easier to believe than my truth, I was never their story to begin with. The interview aired 48 hours later, and in the space between those hours, the world held its breath. Some headlines praised her. Designer Lila Gomez redefines strength with bold interview. Truth, grace, and guts. Gomez speaks out. Others, less so. Too late or too convenient. Gomez's past re-examined. Real or redemption PR. But something remarkable happened in the comments section. Students from Verone, many of whom Lila hadn't spoken to in years, began chiming in. Quiet at first, then louder, confirming the favoritism, the silence, the systemic push to protect donors over designers. They backed her, and the tide turned. Not fast, but enough. Dominic sat in his office when the call came. His board chairman. You're aware of the interview, the man said, voice clipped. I am, Dominic replied. And you're also aware of the risk this association poses to Blackstone's reputation. You've staked a great deal on Miss Gomez financially, publicly. Dominic leaned back in his chair. I'm aware of what I've gained by aligning with her, too. There was a pause on the other end. Dominic. We're days away from announcing the Blackstone Tokyo expansion. Investors are watching. We can't be seen as unstable. Then let them watch closely, Dominic said. Because I'm not disavowing the woman who saved half our public goodwill this quarter with a single runway show. Another silence. Then, quietly, you'll need to be at the shareholder meeting this Friday. Prepared. Dominic hung up and smiled, just slightly, because this time he was. That night, Lila sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by takeout containers and design sketches she hadn't touched in days. Her phone buzzed. Dominic, your interview was art. Dominic, when you spoke, the entire room in my office stopped. Dominic, you're changing the rules. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she typed, Lila, I'm scared of what comes next. He replied instantly, Dominic, that's how you know it's yours. She stared at the message for a long time. Then typed, Lila, can you come over? Dominic, already in the elevator. She laughed, her chest easing for the first time in days. When he arrived, she opened the door without a word and let him wrap his arms around her. They didn't speak for a long time. They didn't need to. Finally, she whispered into his collarbone, They tried to make me feel small again. Dominic kissed the top of her head. They forgot who you are. She pulled back slightly. And who's that? He looked into her eyes. The woman I'm building my future with. And for once, she didn't feel like she was sharing a spotlight. She felt like she'd built her own. And invited him in. Chapter 9. The Edge of Everything. The boardroom smelled like leather and war. Dominic sat at the head of the polished obsidian table, a stack of reports untouched before him. The faces of the Blackstone board lined up like a firing squad. Behind him, a 12-foot-high window overlooking Manhattan. In front of him, men and women who had once trusted him to lead alone. But now, they looked at him with wary calculation, like he was a risk they hadn't budgeted for. Let's be clear, said Charles Blakely, adjusting his bespoke cufflinks. We respect what Miss Gomez has done. The collection was a triumph. But this public entanglement is becoming a liability. She's not an entanglement, Dominic said coolly. She's a partner. A murmur of disapproval rippled across the table. She's not on our payroll. She's not under contract. And she's now part of every story about you, said a woman from legal, folding her hands. That makes her part of our problem when investors start asking why the CEO's love life is shaping company headlines. Dominic leaned back, composed. Still. But underneath, something sharp began to rise. She's shaping the future of what fashion looks like. She's not my distraction. She's the evolution this house needed. A pause. Then Charles dropped the final card. You've built Blackstone into an empire, Dominic. But empires need more than vision. They need stability. So, here's the choice. Step back from the Gomez Association publicly, quietly, professionally, or we reconsider your position ahead of the Tokyo expansion. The words didn't strike like thunder. They landed like frost. Silent. Inevitable. He looked around the table, men who hadn't designed a single collection, women who measured value in quarterly dividends, people who hadn't built the brand but believed they owned it. Dominic exhaled, slow and deep. I'll give you my answer Friday, he said. But he already knew what it would be. Lila's day was the opposite of stillness. She spent it dashing between showroom meetings, speaking with an international distributor, and signing off on the final capsule shipment to Paris. Her brand was moving fast, bold, global. But even as her world expanded, something inside her contracted. Dominic had been quiet since the board meeting. Not distant, just restrained. Measured. And Lila had learned to read that version of him, the man caught between his legacy and his loyalty. In the late afternoon, she finally escaped the chaos and walked to the window of her office, where the skyline stretched like a battlefield of steel and glass. Rachel walked in without knocking. She never knocked. You heard? She asked. Lila didn't turn around. Not officially. But I'm not an idiot. They're pushing him to break the narrative. I am the narrative. Rachel leaned against the edge of the desk. They're not just worried about you, Lila. They're scared of what you mean. A woman who didn't come through their system, who didn't play nice, who didn't ask. Lila finally turned, voice quiet. And what is Dominic supposed to do? Disavow me in public so the men in suits can sleep easier at night? Rachel looked at her for a long moment, then said, carefully, he won't, but it's going to cost him. Silence stretched between them. Not tense, just honest. Lila nodded once. Then I'd rather lose the man who gives in than love the man who breaks for them. That night, she found Dominic in his apartment jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, drink untouched beside a wall of blueprints and old Blackstone campaign photographs. He didn't hear her come in. He was staring at a photo of the first campaign he'd ever shot on a Brooklyn rooftop, using borrowed lights and thrifted fabric. His beginning. His why. Tell me, she said, gently, what they said. Dominic didn't turn right away. When he did, his eyes held the quiet burn of a man walking a line drawn by someone else. They want me to distance myself. Quietly. No drama. Just a slow fade from your shadow. Her jaw tightened. And you? I told them I'd give them an answer Friday. She stepped forward, heart pounding. I'm not going to ask you to fight for me. You're not a fight, he said. You're the reason I remember why I started fighting in the first place. Her throat tightened. He stepped closer. Lila, if I give them what they want, I keep everything I built. And if you don't, I lose the board. Possibly Blackstone. She stared at him, the weight of that truth like glass between them. He reached for her hand. I spent 10 years building something I thought was unshakable. But it was empty. Beautiful. Hollow. He cupped her face. And then you walked in with a sketchbook and changed the architecture of my life. She closed her eyes. His touch was warmth. His voice was anchor. I don't know what happens after Friday, he said. But I know this. I will not pretend you are anything less than the best decision I ever made. Outside, Manhattan glittered on the cusp of midnight. Inside, two people stood at the edge of everything. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't have to. Some love stories weren't about fairy tale endings. They were about choosing the harder path. Together. The boardroom was colder than usual. Dominic stood at the far end of the table, tie loosened, sleeves rolled once at the cuffs, not out of rebellion, but because he refused to armor himself with formality for people who only respected control. He'd given control long enough. Charles Blakely cleared his throat. Let's proceed. We have projections from Tokyo, the European licensing report, and of course, the personal matter. The personal matter sat in the center of the agenda packet like a buried grenade. Dominic didn't wait for them to circle it. He stepped forward. I built Blackstone from the bones of a dream, he said. No partners. No capital. Just fabric, instinct, and refusal. You all joined me later, but I've been here since the first stitch. No one interrupted. Not yet. I've never pretended to be easy or traditional, but I've always been loyal. To the brand, to the vision, to this house. He paused and let the air shift. But I won't be loyal to a lie. Blakely stiffened. No one's asking you to lie. You are, Dominic said. Calm. Cutting. You're asking me to imply that Lila Gomez, the woman whose label reinvigorated half this industry, is a threat to the house I built. You're asking me to detach from the one thing in my life that reminds me why this matters. Why any of it matters. He slid a document onto the table. A single sheet. Signed. Typed. Unapologetic. I'm not stepping back from her, he said. I'm stepping forward with her. And if that means stepping away from Blackstone, so be it. The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. Someone dropped a pen. Charles's face turned to stone. You'd walk away? Over her? No, Dominic said. I'd walk away from me. He turned without waiting for a vote. And didn't look back. Lila was in the studio, pinning fabric onto a dress form when Rachel burst through the door like a gust of wind. Dominic resigned, she said, breathless. He walked out. Lila dropped the pin she was holding. What? Rachel held up her phone. It's already hit the wires. Blackstone confirms transition of CEO role. Interim board leadership installed. Press statement pending. Lila's heart twisted. He actually did it. Rachel nodded. Didn't even flinch. Lila sat down on the edge of the table, stunned. The sound of the world outside the car horns, the buzz of her team prepping the Paris capsule, faded into something distant. "What happens now?" she asked. Rachel gave a crooked smile. "Now? You're dating the most famous ex-CEO in fashion." Lila gave a weak laugh, but under it was something else. Something heavy. She knew what Dominic had just sacrificed, knew it intimately, in the way only another builder could. And she knew how hard it would be for someone like him to stand still, to let go, even for love. That night, she waited for him in the penthouse. He arrived just after 10. No tie, no phone, just him, raw and quiet. He dropped his keys on the counter like they weighed too much. She stepped into his space, arms wrapping around his waist. "You did it." She whispered into his chest. "I did. Are you okay?" "No." He buried his face in her hair. "But I'm free." She pulled back, searching his face. "Do you regret it?" He cupped her jaw. "Only that I didn't do it sooner." They stood in silence. A silence that didn't ache. A silence that held. The next morning, Lila woke to an unexpected email. Subject line: Creative Fellowship Invitation, Florence. She blinked twice before reading the details. An 8-week immersive residency in Italy, fully funded, access to textile houses, ateliers, and mentorship with 3 master designers. A once-in-a-lifetime chance to push her vision beyond the commercial machine. She sat in bed, rereading the message. 1,000 thoughts crashed together: opportunity, expansion, escape, but also leaving. Later that day, she told Dominic over coffee, watching him process. His jaw twitched, just slightly, but his voice was steady. "You have to go." She looked down. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," he said. "You've earned every inch of that invitation. And we just got here." She said quietly, "To this, us." He reached across the table, threading his fingers through hers. "You going doesn't mean we disappear. 8 weeks is a long time. I'll wait 8 years if it means you come back stronger." Her eyes stung. "You sure?" she whispered. Dominic leaned in. "I didn't burn my legacy to hold you back, Lila. I did it to prove I'll walk through fire beside you, even if sometimes we walk on separate paths." She didn't cry, but her hand tightened around his like it was the only real thing in the world. Chapter 10. Threaded Hearts. Florence was made of gold and ghosts. Lila walked the narrow streets in the early mornings, before the tourists arrived, sunlight slipping across terracotta rooftops, the Duomo rising in the distance like a dream carved from stone. The city hummed with old things. Tradition, craftsmanship, silence. Here, no one cared about headlines or gossip or Blackstone. Here, she was just a woman with calloused fingers and too many ideas. Her studio for the fellowship was on the top floor of an old palazzo, windows wide open to the Tuscan air. Dust swirled through sunbeams. The scent of thread-dyed linen hung in the room. She hadn't turned on her phone in 2 days. This was what she thought she wanted: clarity, distance. No Dominic. No noisy. But clarity, it turned out, was complicated. And distance didn't erase what lived inside you. On the 4th week, Lila found herself in front of a cracked mirror, fitting a draped bodice onto a mannequin. She wore no makeup, her curls piled in a loose knot, fingers stained with charcoal from sketch revisions. Her final piece for the fellowship presentation was almost finished, a gown made from vintage hand-woven silk, dyed in soft shades of dusk lavender, rose, and bruised violet. The back opened like a peeled blossom, stitched in deliberate asymmetry, every thread an echo of her journey. But something was missing. Not technically, not structurally, emotionally. She stood back and stared at it. It was beautiful, but empty. She sighed, stepping onto the balcony for air, watching the River Arno turn copper under the setting sun. And that's when she saw the text. Dominic Black. Arrived. Don't panic. I'm hiding behind a very dramatic cypress tree. Lila's heart stopped. She looked down toward the courtyard below, and there he was, dressed like he didn't know he was handsome, linen shirt, sleeves rolled, sunglasses tucked into the collar. He held a paper coffee cup in one hand, the other lifted in a sheepish wave. She laughed. A real one. And suddenly, the dress behind her didn't feel so empty anymore. "I thought you had bored chaos to manage," she said as they sat on the stone steps of her building, sipping cappuccinos an hour later. "I gave up chaos for a living," Dominic replied, watching her like he was breathing again for the first time in weeks. "And Tokyo?" "Delayed the rollout. Rachel's handling it. And your life back in New York?" He shrugged. "My life was never about location. It was about you." Lila narrowed her eyes. "You can't just show up in Italy and say things like that." He tilted his head. "Is that a challenge?" "No. It's a warning." They smiled at each other, the silence between them warm now. Familiar. Then he reached into his satchel and pulled out a roll of fabric wrapped in tissue. "Brought you something," he said, unrolling it carefully. It was a bolt of Blackstone's discontinued silk organza, storm gray with a pearlescent sheen. The same fabric they'd used in the bridal line that started it all. Her fingers trembled as she touched it. "I thought they destroyed the last of this after the leak," she whispered. "They did," he said. "Except one roll. I kept it. Couldn't let it go." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because I knew you'd find a better use for it than I ever could." That night, she stayed in the studio past midnight, sketching on instinct. The new piece came fast and fluid, part dress, part memory, part future. The storm gray organza formed a structural train, blooming from the waist in angles and arcs like wings unfolding. The bodice was minimal, intimate. The back embroidered in hand-stitched thread. Rebirth. Again. She finished at 3:47 a.m. When she finally lay down, she dreamt of black silk and warm hands. On the final day of the fellowship, the presentation hall was hushed. Stone walls. Tall ceilings. Fashion icons seated in worn velvet chairs. And in the front row, Dominic watching her with the steady gaze of someone who'd stopped performing a long time ago. Lila stood backstage, her model poised in the finale gown. Her hands were steady. She had nothing to prove now, only something to offer. The curtain rose, the music swelled, and the last piece walked into the light. The final model stepped onto the stone floor like a prayer in motion. Gasps moved through the room, quiet, reverent. The gown shimmered with impossible restraint. Storm. Gray organza, blooming into architectural panels that unfolded as she walked. A fusion of vulnerability and power. It was movement caught in stillness. A whisper of everything Lila had survived, and everything she had chosen to become. The back of the dress embroidered in delicate, imperfect thread read, "Rebirth, again." Dominic's chest tightened. Because this wasn't just fashion, it was a manifesto stitched in silence. The applause didn't erupt. It rose slow, certain, complete. People stood. Some of them cried. Even the stoic Parisian curator in the front row was clapping with both hands. But Lila didn't hear any of it. She was backstage, hand pressed to her chest, breath caught, because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she'd proved something. She felt like she'd shared something. And it had been seen, truly seen. Later, after interviews and congratulations and too many glasses of Prosecco, Lila stepped out into the Florentine night, heels in one hand, silence in the other. Dominic was waiting for her. Not with champagne. Not with spectacle. Just with a look that told her he knew this was sacred. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Empty," she admitted. "In a good way. Like I gave the world everything I had." He nodded. "You did." They walked quietly through the winding streets. Lights glowed soft in windows overhead. Laughter drifted from a trattoria. The city was alive with history, but for once, Lila felt like she wasn't chasing anyone's footsteps. They reached the Ponte Vecchio. The Arno glittered beneath them like melted starlight. Dominic turned to her. "Can I ask you something?" he said, voice soft. "Lila tilta her head. If it's whether I'll let you buy another bolt of discontinued silk for your emotional emergencies, the answer is no." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because this wasn't a joke. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. But it wasn't a ring box. It was a scrap of fabric cut from her final gown, the word rebirth still visible on it. "I thought about proposing with a ring again," he said. "But that's not what this is." She looked at the fabric in his hand. "This isn't a proposal," he continued. "It's an offering. Of a future. One we build, not perform." She swallowed. Hard. "I'm not asking you to belong to me," he said. "I'm asking if you'll let me belong beside you." Lila reached for the fabric, ran her fingers over the stitching she'd sewn in the quietest hours of her life. She looked up at him. "I don't need a promise," she said. "I need presence." He stepped closer. "Then you'll have it. In every language, every country, every season." She smiled, and for once, the tears didn't feel like a collapse. They felt like beginning. "Yes," she whispered. And this time, there was no crowd, no stage, no Ali. Just two people beneath the moonlight of Florence, threaded together. Finally. Truly. Epilogue 1 year later. New York Fashion Week, Fall Collection. Dominic stood in the wings, now creative director of Blackstone Atelier but no longer its owner. His name was still on the walls, but hers was on the runway. Gomez ex Blackstone. The partnership that had once begun as fiction was now fashion's most sought-after collaboration. Lila appeared at the close of the show, hand in hand with the lead model, waving to the crowd. The applause was deafening. Dominic watched her, not with pride, but with peace. Because love, he had learned, wasn't about possession. It was about presence. And as Lila turned toward him, smiling, glowing, he walked out to meet her under the lights, no longer a man pretending, but a man who had finally come home,